The math said he should be dead. By the end of the day, history said otherwise. October 26, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The jungle did not sleep. Humidity clung to skin and steel alike. Rifles sweated, machine gun receivers slicked with condensation. The night pressed down with thick, airless weight, as if the island itself were holding its breath. Along the defensive perimeter of Henderson Field, Marines waited in shallow foxholes carved from coral and mud. They had learned the pattern by now. The Japanese preferred darkness, infiltration, and closing in before the shooting began. Private First Class Mitchell Paige crouched beside his section's guns. 4 Browning .30 caliber machine guns, 2 air-cooled M1919s and 2 water-cooled M1917s. Each weapon had its limits. The air-cooled guns were lighter, faster to move, quicker to overheat. The water-cooled guns were heavier, steadier, dependent on intact jackets and full hoses. Ammunition belts were stacked in sandbagged niches, 250 rounds per belt, cloth links, dull metal cartridges hidden in the moonless dark. Paige checked them again. Feed trays clean, headspace set, barrels aligned, traverse and elevation locked. The line around him was thin. Marines on Guadalcanal had been fighting for more than 2 months, malaria, dysentery, fungus infections, rotting feet inside boots. Supplies arrived only at night under constant threat of air attack. Reinforcements came slower than casualties. Across the jungle, the Japanese Sendai Division prepared another push. Their objective was brutally simple: break the perimeter, retake the airfield, erase the American foothold. The first sound was not gunfire, but movement, leaves brushing cloth, branches snapping under weight, a low murmur of voices carried through damp air. Then came the flares. White light ripped open the darkness, shadows snapping into violent relief, palms and tangled vines frozen like explosions, and the jungle screamed. Rifles cracked along the line, Arasaka bolts cycling, Springfields answering. Machine guns erupted seconds later. The Brownings spoke in hard mechanical rhythm, thud, 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 thud. Tracer rounds slashed red paths through the trees, recoil driving tripods into dirt, hot casings pouring down like brass rain. Japanese infantry surged from the undergrowth, close, too close. Some Marines never fired. Some guns never stabilized. Some positions vanished under grenade blasts. Within minutes, Paige's section began to collapse. One gun went silent, crew hit. Another stuttered, barrel overheating, assistant gunner down. A third gun stopped entirely, water jacket punctured, steam venting into the night. Paige crawled. Bullets cut overhead, dirt spat into his face, the air thick with burned powder and wet earth. He reached the first abandoned weapon, an M1919, swung it toward advancing shapes and pressed the butterfly trigger. The gun bucked alive, short bursts, controlled fire 5 to 7 rounds at a time. Targets fell, more appeared. The line continued to fail. Paige moved again to a second gun, an M1917. The water jacket was half full, hose severed, cooling compromised. He fired anyway. Longer bursts now, desperation overtaking doctrine. The barrel glowed faintly, the receiver shaking as he fought to keep it running. Japanese soldiers closed to grenade range. Paige shifted again, third gun, fourth gun. Each weapon became a temporary wall, each pause between movements an invitation to die. Time lost meaning. Combat reduced everything to fragments, ammunition belts feeding through burning fingers, empty casings piling around knees, shoulders bruised from recoil, ears ringing under relentless concussion. Sweat blinded him. Mosquitoes swarmed through cordite haze. Hands burned against heated steel. He shouted for support. None came. Most of the section was dead or wounded. Japanese infantry probed the gaps, some reaching the gun pits before being cut down, others crawling forward through bodies and debris. Paige understood the geometry of survival. Keep the guns firing, keep them spaced, never let silence spread. He dragged one Browning into a new position after its tripod collapsed, coral tearing open his palms, mud sucking at the weapon's weight, 31 pounds for the gun, 44 for the tripod, more for ammunition. He set it and fired again. The attack intensified. Mortars thumped from unseen positions, explosions lifting dirt and bone into the air, rifle fire thickening into constant tearing noise. Still Paige moved, gun to gun, burst to burst, at times firing 2 weapons in alternating sequence to simulate a fully manned section, illusion as defense, sound as intimidation. The attackers hesitated, not from fear but confusion. The volume of fire suggested strength where there was almost none. Toward dawn, the assault began to break. Not cleanly, not dramatically, momentum simply bled away. The jungle that had poured men forward now swallowed survivors back into shadow. Shots became scattered, then sporadic, then distant. Silence returned in ragged pieces. Paige remained behind the guns, hands trembling, uniform soaked, eyes raw from smoke and exhaustion. Around him lay the evidence of the night: destroyed weapons, shattered sandbags, bodies tangled in wire and churned mud. The perimeter had held barely. The sun rose over Guadalcanal as if nothing had happened. But along that narrow stretch of Henderson Field's defenses, mathematics had failed. By every calculation of probability, exposure, isolation, sustained fire under direct assault, one Marine should not have survived. Yet he did, and history by the end of the day said otherwise. Morning did not bring comfort. It brought clarity. The returning light revealed distances the darkness had concealed. The jungle edge sat disturbingly close to the Marine line, in places less than 40 yards, close enough for a sprint, close enough for grenades, close enough for another night like the last. The air grew hotter by the minute as Guadalcanal's sun climbed with indifferent force. Steam lifted from churned earth, and the metallic smell of blood mingled with wet vegetation and burnt powder. Paige remained where he had fought. The Brownings surrounded him like exhausted animals while gun crews moved slowly through the wreckage, counting belts, checking barrels, clearing chambers. Casualty reports arrived in fragments, names, wounds, missing, and the numbers told their own story. Paige's machine gun section had been nearly erased. Weapons lay damaged beyond immediate repair. Tripods twisted, water jackets punctured, feed mechanisms jammed with dirt. Ammunition expenditure had been severe. Belts emptied at a rate no manual recommended, doctrinal fire discipline abandoned under the raw arithmetic of survival. Yet the perimeter had not collapsed, and that fact mattered more than anything else. Beyond the lines, Japanese forces regrouped. The previous night's attack had not been a reckless charge, but part of a coordinated effort tied to the larger battle for Henderson Field within the broader Guadalcanal campaign. Japanese command still believed the airfield could be retaken, still believed American defenses were brittle, still believed pressure would crack them. Throughout the morning, Marine patrols reported movement, not withdrawal but repositioning. Mortar crews shifted deeper into concealment, rifle units probed alternate approaches, machine gun nests were reestablished. The battle was not over, it had merely changed tempo. Artillery began first. Japanese 70mm battalion guns and mortars opened intermittent fire on Henderson Field's perimeter, rounds landing unpredictably, some short, some wide, some directly inside defensive positions, each impact shaking nerves already frayed. Marine counter-battery response remained limited. Ammunition conservation was critical, naval gunfire support unavailable in daylight, air support constrained by aircraft availability and fuel. The Marines absorbed the shelling with helmets low and bodies pressed flat, waiting between explosions. Paige worked with what remained. Damaged Brownings were stripped and evaluated, barrels swapped where possible, tripods scavenged, water hoses improvised. One M1917's jacket had been holed but still held partial pressure. Another required sealing attempts using field-expedient methods, cloth packing, tightened fittings, anything that might delay overheating. There were not enough guns. There were not enough men. Every surviving weapon mattered. Shortly before noon, rifle fire erupted along a neighboring sector, sharp and sudden. Japanese infantry tested the line again, not a full assault but a pressure probe. Marines answered with disciplined bursts, single shots, controlled fire, no waste. Paige repositioned one operational Browning to reinforce the threatened area, crossing ground that offered little cover. Coral fragments sliced through trousers, sweat blurred vision. He set the gun low, sighted across tangled brush, and waited. Shapes emerged in the foliage, movement first, then uniforms. He fired in short bursts, 3 seconds, pause, 3 seconds, pause. The recoil steadied into familiar rhythm as tracers cut bright paths through the midday haze. The probe faltered, but the message was unmistakable. The Japanese were still here, still aggressive, still measuring weakness. Heat took its toll. Guadalcanal did not forgive exertion. Uniforms soaked through, salt-crusted skin, hands cramped from dehydration. Water discipline became survival discipline, canteens rationed, refill points exposed to sniper observation. Malaria symptoms stalked the ranks, headaches, chills, sudden fatigue. Men fought both enemy and environment. Afternoon brought aerial tension. American lookouts scanned the skies for Japanese aircraft. Henderson Field remained a constant target for bombing and strafing whenever conditions allowed. Engines were heard before shapes were seen, anti-aircraft crews preparing for impact, yet the planes veered elsewhere that day, diverted by weather and operational priorities. The absence of attack provided no comfort. It merely postponed another threat. As daylight faded, unease deepened. Veterans of Guadalcanal understood the cycle: shelling, probing, silence, then night. Japanese doctrine favored darkness for a reason. Their units excelled at infiltration, close-quarters assaults, coordinated night attacks designed to fracture defensive cohesion. Marines prepared accordingly. Fields of fire cleared where possible, ammunition redistributed, grenades checked and stacked. Paige inspected the Brownings again: headspace, timing, feed pawls clean, belts positioned for rapid access. He knew what darkness might bring. Twilight collapsed quickly in the tropics. Light drained from jungle and sky alike, shapes dissolving, edges blurring, sound sharpening. Then came the rain, sudden, heavy. Water hammered helmets and tarps, foxholes filling, mud thickening beneath boots. Machine guns demanded constant protection, receivers covered, belts shielded from soaking, actions checked for contamination. Rain masked movement. Rain concealed approach. Rain favored infiltration. The first signs came as whispers in the wire, a faint metallic tremor, then a shout, then gunfire. Japanese forces surged again beneath the cover of storm and darkness, closer than before, more determined. Rifles cracked along the perimeter, grenades detonated in violent bursts of light and earth, machine guns roared awake across the line. Paige moved into position. One Browning was already firing, another struggling to stabilize. Japanese soldiers pushed through rain and mud, their advance partially shielded by weather and terrain. Paige seized a second gun and fired. The barrel heated rapidly, steam rising where rain struck steel. Visibility collapsed into chaos, muzzle flashes, tracers, silhouettes. The attack built momentum, pressure returning without relief. And somewhere in the storm-dark jungle, Japanese officers committed additional waves forward. The rain intensified, water pouring relentlessly into foxholes and transforming carefully prepared fighting positions into shallow pits of mud. Sandbags sagged under the soaking weight, and loose ammunition belts became drenched, their cloth links swollen, heavy, and slick. Visibility collapsed into violent fragments, muzzle flashes tearing through darkness, tracer streaks slicing across sheets of rain, shadows breaking unpredictably through tangled foliage. Japanese infantry advanced in bursts, using the storm's thunderous noise to mask movement. Their tactics favored deadly proximity, close enough to throw grenades, close enough to overwhelm before defenders could recover. Marine riflemen fired at shapes more than targets, the fight reduced to rhythm and instinct. Single shots, short bursts, reload, repeat. In that chaos of rain, mud, and fractured sightlines, machine guns became the backbone of the defense. Paige's Browning hammered against its tripod, thud, thud, thud. He fired controlled bursts when possible, longer streams when the line buckled. Rain struck the receiver, rising in hissing clouds of steam as barrel temperature climbed despite the downpour. Assistant gunners were scarce, some dead, some wounded, others pinned down, leaving Paige to work alone, feeding belts, clearing stoppages, adjusting traverse. Japanese soldiers pushed toward a weakened section of the perimeter where earlier damage had thinned Marine positions. Grenades detonated along the wire, shrapnel slicing through palm leaves and flesh alike. Paige shifted fire and swept the approach. The Browning's recoil dug deeper into mud-soft ground, threatening stability. He braced the weapon with his body, shoulder pressed hard against the stock, cheek close to vibrating steel. A stoppage, the bolt half-cycled. Paige cleared it by touch, fingers numb from cold rain and heat-burned metal. The action slammed forward again. He fired. Japanese pressure mounted. Bugle calls pierced the storm, sharp, eerie notes rising above gunfire as officers drove their men forward through sheets of rain. Wave after wave surged. Some fell immediately, others crawled. Others reached grenade range. Explosions rocked Paige's position, dirt and water showering over the gun. A nearby Marine collapsed backward into his flooded hole. The perimeter bent but did not break. A second Browning fell silent to Paige's left, crew hit. Paige moved, crawling through mud churned by boots and bodies as bullets snapped invisibly overhead. He reached the abandoned gun, dragged it into alignment, and opened fire. Alternating guns now right, left, right again, maintaining the illusion of a fully manned section. Sound became deterrence. Rhythm became deception. The Japanese advance hesitated under the crushing volume of fire, not halted, but slowed. The strain turned mechanical. Barrels neared critical heat. Receivers fouled with wet debris. Belts stuck under saturated cloth. Paige changed barrels where he could, hands blistered, skin burned, working without gloves. Time compressed into brutal survival cycles: fire, move, clear, reload. Some Japanese soldiers breached the wire. Close combat erupted in scattered pockets along the line, rifle butts, bayonets, pistols fired at arm's length. Paige could not leave the guns. If the Brownings fell silent, the gap would widen. If the gap widened, Henderson Field's perimeter could unravel. He kept firing, even as figures emerged alarmingly close through rain and smoke, even as grenades burst within yards, even as exhaustion clawed at muscle and mind. Hours blurred into storm, gunfire, mud, heat, cold. Then, gradually, the pressure changed. Japanese attacks began to lose cohesion. Commands grew scattered. Bugle calls faded. Assault waves thinned. Marine rifle fire steadied. Machine guns reasserted dominance over the approaches. The attackers began to pull back into darkness, not from lack of courage, but from catastrophic losses. Rain eased toward dawn. Gunfire became sporadic, then distant. Silence returned unevenly across the shattered perimeter. Paige slumped behind the Browning, body trembling, uniform soaked and caked with mud, hands raw, burned, shaking. Around him lay the evidence of another night survived: broken weapons, flooded foxholes, dead and wounded Marines. Beyond the wire, the jungle concealed the terrible cost paid by the attackers. The sky lightened. Guadalcanal revealed itself once more, the perimeter still held. But the battle had reached a critical threshold, both sides exhausted, both sides bloodied, neither willing to yield. And decisions now loomed that would shape the fate of Henderson Field. Morning patrols moved cautiously. Even in daylight, the jungle remained dangerous. Japanese snipers, wounded stragglers, and concealed positions could still inflict lethal damage. Marines advanced past the wire step by step, senses sharpened by exhaustion and experience. What they found beyond the perimeter altered the psychological landscape of the fight. Japanese casualties were extensive. Bodies lay scattered across the approaches, equipment abandoned, assault formations shattered. The repeated night attacks had exacted a devastating toll. Japanese command now faced a hard reality. The offensive aimed at retaking Henderson Field, culminating in the Battle for Henderson Field, October 23-26, 1942, had failed. Despite numerical strength, despite aggressive doctrine, despite relentless assaults, Marine defenses had not collapsed. For the Marines, survival carried its own burden. Ammunition stocks were depleted, weapons worn and damaged, units reduced by casualties and disease. Yet Henderson Field remained operational, and that single fact changed everything. Aircraft could still launch, supplies could still arrive, naval forces could still coordinate. The airfield, battered, contested, but intact, continued to anchor the American presence on Guadalcanal. Paige's actions were assessed in the aftermath as witness accounts converged. Multiple machine guns kept in action, repeated repositioning under direct assault, sustained fire that prevented a breakthrough. His defense had sealed a critical gap at a moment when collapse was entirely plausible. Commanders recognized the tactical significance. A perimeter failure there could have opened Henderson Field to penetration. A successful Japanese breakthrough might have destroyed aircraft, disrupted operations, and potentially reversed the campaign's momentum. But the turning point extended beyond a single position. Japanese losses during the failed assaults crippled their ability to mount comparable offensives, their units suffering irreplaceable depletion in trained infantry. The initiative began to shift, gradually, then irreversibly. Guadalcanal's campaign did not end that day. Fighting would continue for months, but the balance had changed. And Henderson Field, still in American hands, became the pivot around which the Pacific War would increasingly turn. The days that followed were not triumphant, they were grinding. Heat, disease, and supply shortages defined daily existence. Marines endured malaria outbreaks, fungal infections, and chronic fatigue. Reinforcements arrived only in trickles, equipment replaced slowly, the defensive perimeter strengthened yard by yard through sweat, labor, and attrition. Paige remained with his unit, alive against probability. His body carried the cost of survival. Burned hands, muscles drained by exhaustion, sleep deprivation measured in minutes rather than hours. Combat stress left no visible wound, yet lingered relentlessly, memories of muzzle flashes exploding through rain, the sound of approaching footsteps in darkness, the unshakable knowledge of how close the line had come to breaking. Recognition came later. Reports were filed, testimonies gathered, evaluations completed through the chain of command. Paige would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions on Guadalcanal. The citations spoke in formal language of extraordinary heroism, conspicuous gallantry, and the defense of a vital position under overwhelming attack. He survived Guadalcanal. He survived the war, but survival did not erase the past, it preserved it. Guadalcanal marked a strategic hinge in World War II. It became the first major Allied offensive against Japanese forces in the Pacific, shattering the perception of unstoppable Japanese expansion and forcing Japan into a prolonged, resource-draining defensive posture. At the center of that struggle stood Henderson Field. Air power radiated from its coral runway, and control of the skis translated directly into control of sea lanes, supply routes, and operational momentum. Individual actions rarely decide wars, but they decide moments. Moments decide outcomes, and outcomes shape history. Paige's defense was one such moment, a machine gun section reduced nearly to silence, a perimeter gap under concentrated assault, one Marine refusing to let the guns fall quiet. The mathematics of combat are unforgiving: exposure time, volume of fire, enemy proximity. By calculation alone, survival was unlikely. Yet the guns kept firing, and Henderson Field did not fall. History records campaigns, divisions, fleets, yet it is built from human endurance, fatigue ignored, fear contained, duty carried forward under conditions where retreat would have been understandable. Guadalcanal became a proving ground for doctrine, logistics, and resilience, and for the simple, brutal truth that holding ground sometimes depends on individuals performing far beyond expectation. The jungle has long since reclaimed the scars of battle, but the consequences remain. The Pacific War shifted, the Allied advance accelerated, and the path toward eventual victory narrowed through places like Henderson Field.